a tale of vengeance and justice. The morning sun barely crept over the rooftops of Willow Creek, a quiet suburban neighborhood in Maplewood, New Jersey, when I, Daniel Carter, a 32-year-old software engineer, stepped out of my apartment on Cedar Lane. At 6:45 a.m., I was already running late for a critical meeting at my company, Apex Tech Solutions. My black Toyota Camry waited in its usual spot, gleaming under the early light. But as I hurried toward it, a chilling sight stopped me dead in my tracks. There, standing beside her silver Ford Escape, was Margaret Maggie Thompson, a 58-year-old widow with a severe gray bun and a permanent scowl that could curdle milk. She was the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek, a woman who'd moved into the beige house with the garish blue door 6 months earlier and immediately declared herself the neighborhood's watchdog. Maggie had a reputation. She'd called the police on kids for skateboarding, on dog walkers for suspicious lingering, and on me twice. Once for loitering while I fumbled with my car keys, and another time for playing Miles Davis at a barely audible volume on a Sunday afternoon. This morning, though, Maggie wasn't just watching. She was poised like a general before battle, her phone already in hand, her eyes glinting with something I'd later recognize as triumph. Her car was a wreck, passenger window shattered, front tire slashed beyond repair, lying flat against the asphalt. It looked like the work of vandals, maybe bored teenagers. But Maggie had other ideas. "You did this," she shrieked, her voice slicing through the quiet street. "I saw you, Daniel Carter. I have proof." Her accusation was so loud, so theatrical, that a few neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains. I stood there, briefcase in hand, my navy suit slightly wrinkled from the rush, staring at her in disbelief. "Ma'am, I just walked out of my apartment," I said, keeping my tone even, though my heart was racing. "I was home all night. I have no idea what happened to your car." But Maggie wasn't interested in reason. She was already on the phone with 911, her voice dripping with faux panic. "Yes, I need police now. A black man vandalized my car. He's threatening me, and I'm terrified." The way she spat out "black man" made my skin crawl. This wasn't about a damaged car. This was about something far uglier, and I was about to find out just how deep her vendetta ran. Maggie had been watching me for months, memorizing my routines when I left for work, when I got home, even when my girlfriend, Laura Bennett, visited. She'd peer through her blinds every morning, pretending to water her oversaturated azaleas every evening, all to keep tabs on me. Her earlier police calls had been petty, but this was calculated. The shattered window, the slashed tire, the perfectly timed accusation, it was all part of a plan I couldn't yet fathom. The police arrived within minutes, faster than I'd ever seen them respond to anything in Willow Creek. 2 officers stepped out of their cruiser. Officer Ramirez, a weary Latino in his 40s who looked like he'd seen too many neighborhood spats, and Officer Lee, a younger Asian woman with a sharp, no-nonsense gaze. Maggie launched into her performance without missing a beat. "Officers, thank God you're here," she cried, pointing at me like I was brandishing a weapon instead of a briefcase. "This man destroyed my car. I saw him at 2 a.m. with a tire iron, smashing my window and slashing my tire. I was too scared to go outside, but I watched from my bedroom." Her story was so detailed, mess stamps, a specific weapon, even crocodile tears, that I almost admired her audacity. If I hadn't been binge-watching a sci-fi series and eating leftover pizza at 2 a.m., I might have doubted my memory. "Sir, where were you at 2 a.m.? Officer Ramirez asked, flipping open his notepad. His tone was neutral, which I appreciated. "In my apartment, for C. Right there," I said, pointing to my building across the street. "I was streaming a show, probably crashed on the couch around 1:30. I can show you my streaming history, and my neighbors can confirm I didn't leave." But Maggie wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and showed the officers photos of her car's damage, time-stamped at 2:17 a.m., 2:23 a.m., and 2:31 a.m. The images were crisp, taken from multiple angles, and almost professionally staged. Officer Lee raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, you said you were too scared to go outside, but these photos were taken up close." Maggie's composure faltered for a split second, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "I took them this morning when I found the damage," she stammered. "I was so upset, I forgot I'd already called about seeing it happen." The cracks in her story were starting to show, but Maggie had one more card to play. "Officers, this man has been harassing me for weeks," she declared. "He plays loud music, has shady people coming and going, and yesterday, I saw him spying on me with binoculars." "Binoculars?" I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Ma'am, I don't own binoculars. The only people who visit me are Laura and my mom." But her words had done their damage. I saw Officer Ramirez's demeanor shift, his eyes narrowing slightly. Suddenly, I wasn't just a guy in a property dispute, I was a problem neighbor. Maggie's accusations, built on nothing but her word, were enough to tip the scales. "Sir, we need you to come with us for questioning," Ramirez said, reaching for his handcuffs. "You're being arrested for vandalism and harassment." "This is insane," I protested. "Check the security cameras. Talk to my neighbors. I can prove I was home." But as they cuffed me in front of my gawking neighbors, I caught Maggie's expression. It wasn't just satisfaction, it was victory. Her smug smile told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was personal, and it was only the beginning. As the police car pulled away, I saw Maggie through the rear window, already back on her phone, animated and almost gleeful. She wasn't calling to report a crime, she was celebrating a win. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with a nosy neighbor. I was up against a master manipulator who'd been planning this for months. The next 3 weeks in county jail would test my sanity, but they'd also reveal the depths of Maggie's scheme and the evidence that would turn her plan against her. The county jail in Maplewood was a grim, fluorescent-lit maze of concrete and steel, smelling faintly of disinfectant and despair. I, Daniel Carter, sat on a thin mattress in a cell I shared with a wiry guy named Eddie, who was in for unpaid traffic finesse, a crime that barely seemed to justify the place's oppressive atmosphere. At 32, I'd never imagined myself here, especially not for something I didn't do. But Maggie Thompson's accusation had landed me in this nightmare, and as the days dragged on, I began to unravel the scope of her vendetta. Eddie, my cellmate, was a talker, and after I spilled the story of Maggie's frame-up, he leaned back against the wall, scratching his stubbled chin. "Man, you got played," he said. "This lady didn't just wake up and decide to pin this on you. She's been plotting, probably got a whole playbook. You're not dealing with a Korean, you're dealing with a chess master." He wasn't wrong. While I was locked up, my girlfriend, Laura Bennett, a paralegal with a knack for digging up dirt, was piecing together the puzzle from the outside. Laura's calls monitored and frustratingly brief became my lifeline. On day 5, she dropped a bombshell. "Daniel, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "I've been talking to neighbors, and Maggie's been asking about you for months. Mrs. Larson in 5B said Maggie wanted to know your work hours, if you had a girlfriend, and even if you'd ever been arrested. She was building a file on you." It got worse. Laura discovered Maggie had been waging a silent war against me, filing complaints with our landlord, the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, and even the city council. She'd claimed I was running an illegal car repair shop out of my apartment, subletting to gang members, and dealing drugs because Laura and my mom visited too often. None of it was true, but Maggie was crafting a narrative, a paper trail to make her vandalism accusation seem like the inevitable climax of my criminal behavior. Her most audacious move? Filing a restraining order against me while I was in jail. The document, which Laura got a copy of, claimed I'd been stalking Maggie, lurking around her property, and making veiled threats about her minding her own business. The dates she listed matched times I was just walking to my car or grabbing takeout, mundane moments she'd twisted into menace. She even claimed 2 neighbors had witnessed my threatening behavior, but when Laura tracked down those names, they belonged to people who'd moved away months ago. Maggie was betting no one would check. But Maggie's plan wasn't just about getting me arrested. She'd hired a high-priced lawyer, Richard Hawthorne, to sue me for $50,000, citing property damage, emotional distress, and loss of peaceful enjoyment of her home. Laura's voice shook as she explained the stakes during another call. "Daniel, she's going for everything: criminal charges, civil ruin, and a restraining order to force you out of Willow Creek. If this works, you'll lose your savings, your job, and have a record that'll haunt you forever." Maggie didn't stop there. She'd somehow gotten my work contact info and called Apex Tech Solutions, spinning tales about my violent tendencies and criminal behavior. My boss, Sarah Kim, a no-nonsense woman who'd mentored me for years, saw through the lies and assured me my job was safe. But Maggie's attempt to sabotage my career showed how far she was willing to go. This wasn't just a neighbor dispute, it was a full-scale assault on my life. As I lay on my bunk each night, listening to Eddie's snores, I marveled at Maggie's obsession. She'd turned framing me into a second job, complete with research, fake witnesses, and a legal strategy that would have impressed a mob boss. But lies, I'd soon learn, are like sandcastles, impressive until the tide comes in. And Maggie's tide was coming. On day 18, my public defender, Karen Mitchell, walked into the visitation room with a grin that lit up the dingy space. Karen was a tireless advocate, overworked but fiercely dedicated, and she'd been digging into my case like a bloodhound. "Daniel, we've got her," she said, spreading out a folder of documents. "Laura led me to something that's going to crack this wide open. Ever heard of Ring doorbell cameras?" My heart skipped. Willow Creek was the kind of place where every other house had a security camera, but I hadn't thought about them until now. Mr. Jenkins, who lived 2 doors down from Maggie, had installed a Ring system 6 months ago, capturing a wide view of the street, including Maggie's driveway and part of my building. Laura had convinced Jenkins to check the footage from the night of the alleged vandalism. "The video's a game changer," Karen said, barely containing her excitement. "At 2:17 a.m., when Maggie claimed she saw you smashing her car, the street's empty except for a stray cat. But at 2:45 a.m., guess who shows up?" She paused for effect. Maggie herself, in a bathrobe and slippers, carrying a hammer. I leaned forward, my pulse racing. "You're kidding." "Nope," Karen said. "The footage is clear. She spends 10 minutes wrecking her car, smashes the window, slashes the tire with a knife. Then, at 3:15 a.m., she comes back out with her phone and starts snapping photos, the same one she showed the cops." It got better. The camera had audio, and though it was muffled, a forensic specialist had cleaned it up. Maggie could be heard muttering, "This'll teach him," and most damningly, "No one's going to believe a black man over me." My stomach churned at the words, but they were also the nail in her coffin. Karen wasn't done. With the video as leverage, she'd gotten a warrant to search Maggie's phone, financial records, and internet history. The findings were a masterclass in premeditated malice. Maggie's search history included how to file a false police report without getting caught, emotional distress lawsuit payouts, and restraining order requirements. She'd withdrawn $2,000 in cash 2 weeks before the incident, likely to cover lawyer fees and keep her plan off the books. Most chillingly, her email drafts folder contained a detailed blueprint of her scheme, including backup plans like planting drugs in my car or accusing me of threatening her family if the vandalism charge didn't stick. "She researched you, Daniel," Karen said. "Your work schedule, Laura's routine, even your mom's social media. She knew your mother was visiting next month and planned to accuse you of threatening her, too." Maggie's motive was as twisted as her methods. She was drowning in debt, behind on her mortgage, credit cards maxed out, foreclosure looming. She saw me as a soft target, someone she could sue for a big payout by exploiting racial biases in the system. One draft email laid it bare. "Black men are assumed to be dangerous, so I just need to lean into that. Arrest, restraining order, lawsuit $50,000 minimum. Even if he fights, legal fees will ruin him." I sat back, stunned. Maggie had weaponized racism as a business plan, and I'd been her mark. But her arrogance was her undoing. Every search, every draft, every phone call left a digital trail, and she'd been too cocky to cover her tracks. As Karen gathered the evidence, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Maggie's house of lies was about to collapse, and I'd be there to watch it fall. The air in the county jail felt heavier with each passing day, but on day 21, something shifted. I, Daniel Carter, was still reeling from the bombshell my public defender, Karen Mitchell, had dropped about Maggie Thompson's self-incriminating Ring doorbell footage. That morning, Karen strode into the visitation room with a stack of papers and a smile that could have powered the entire facility. "Pack your stuff, Daniel," she said. "You're going home today. And Maggie Thompson? She's about to have the worst day of her life." The district attorney had reviewed Karen's evidence, the video, Maggie's search history, her damning email drafts, and it was so overwhelming they didn't just drop the charges against me. They issued an arrest warrant for Maggie, charging her with filing false police reports, insurance fraud, perjury, witness tampering, and criminal simulation, faking evidence of a crime. The irony was delicious. Maggie had orchestrated my arrest, but now she was the one facing handcuffs. As Karen drove me back to Willow Creek, she filled me in on the chaos that had erupted while I was locked up. The ring footage had leaked to the neighborhood's Facebook group. Nobody knew how, but gossip travels fast. The community was in an uproar. Mrs. Larson from 5B posted about how Maggie had offered her $500 to lie about seeing me act threatening. Mr. Jenkins, the camera's owner, was telling everyone how Maggie had quizzed him about his security system, clearly scoping out what she could get away with. Even the mail carrier, Carlos, came forward, saying Maggie had been intercepting my mail and asking nosy questions about my personal life. She turned her racism into a neighborhood project, Karen said, chuckling as we pulled into Willow Creek. She had people spying on you, documenting your routine, like she was running a CIA operation. But the real kicker came when we reached my apartment. Through Maggie's front window, I saw her in handcuffs, surrounded by police officers with evidence bags, having what looked like a full-blown meltdown. The timing was poetic. I was walking free at the exact moment she was being arrested for the crime she'd pinned on me. Laura, my girlfriend, was waiting inside with champagne, Chinese takeout, and a folder of civil lawsuit paperwork. "Welcome home, babe," she said, kissing me like I'd just come back from a war. "Now let's make Maggie pay for every second you spent in that cell." Our civil suit wasn't just about compensation for my wrongful arrest, though that was a big part. We were suing Maggie for malicious prosecution, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violating my civil rights. We wanted damages for lost wages, legal fees, emotional trauma, and punitive damages to ensure she'd never try this again. The best part? Maggie's evidence, her emails, her recorded confessions to friends, her search history would be used against her. She built the perfect case against herself, Karen said as we planned our strategy around my kitchen table. Every lie she told is documented, backed by digital proof and witnesses. Maggie's downfall didn't stop with her arrest. While she was in custody, her world unraveled faster than a cheap sweater. Her employer, St. Mary's Hospital, where she worked as an administrative assistant, suspended her pending an investigation. It turned out Maggie had a history of racist remarks at work, refusing to process paperwork for a black patient because she didn't trust them to pay, and making derogatory comments about Hispanic patients. The hospital, facing a potential discrimination lawsuit, fired her within days. Her mortgage company, spooked by the news coverage, accelerated her foreclosure. The house with the blue door was slated for auction, and the local real estate gossip mill ensured everyone knew Maggie was not only a criminal but broke. Her lawyer, Richard Hawthorne, who'd taken her $15,000 retainer for the civil suit against me, filed a complaint with the State Bar Association, accusing her of fraud for lying to him. He was now suing her to recover his fees, adding another legal headache to her growing list. But Maggie, ever defiant, tried to fight back. She hired a new, budget lawyer and claimed she was the victim, traumatized by living near a threatening individual, me. Her attorney argued she'd acted out of fear, not malice. The problem? Her evidence obliterated that defense. Her search history, emails, and recorded boasts to her book club about teaching that black guy a lesson proved her actions were premeditated. At a pre-trial hearing, Judge Eleanor Harris, a no-nonsense woman with 25 years on the bench, shut Maggie down cold. "Miss Thompson, the evidence shows you planned this scheme for months," she said. This was not fear. This was a calculated crime. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was buzzing. The local news, Channel 9, ran a story titled "Suburban Woman's Elaborate Plot to Frame Neighbor Exposed." Reporter Lisa Daniels interviewed me 3 days after my release, and I didn't hold back. I wanted the world to know what Maggie had done and how she'd almost gotten away with it. Lisa had the ring footage, Maggie's search history, and screenshots of her social media posts gloating about cleaning up the neighborhood. The segment was a masterclass in investigative journalism, painting Maggie as a racist manipulator who'd weaponized the system for profit. The fallout was swift. Maggie's book club friends, horrified by her racist rants, reported her to the police. Her sister, Diane, who lived in Pennsylvania, was so appalled she called the cops herself, turning over recordings of Maggie bragging about framing me. Even Maggie's social media posts, which she'd thought were private, were screenshotted and sent to investigators. She'd been so sure of her victory that she'd confess to anyone who'd listen, and now those confessions were burying her. As I settled back into my life, the contrast couldn't have been starker. While Maggie faced a mounting pile of charges and a community that despised her, I was rebuilding. Apex Tech Solutions welcomed me back with a raise, and Laura and I started planning our future. But Maggie's story was far from over. While she'd been plotting my destruction, she'd been running a side hustle that would make her legal troubles look like a parking ticket. The next revelation would blow the case wide open and expose Maggie as more than a vindictive neighbor. She was a career criminal. The weeks following my release from jail were a whirlwind of relief and vindication, but the saga of Maggie Thompson was far from over. I, Daniel Carter, had been freed, my name cleared, and my life slowly piecing back together in Willow Creek, New Jersey. But Maggie's meticulously crafted plan to frame me had opened a Pandora's box, exposing a criminal operation that stretched far beyond her vendetta against me. As I sat in my apartment with Laura, my girlfriend, and Karen, my public defender, the full scope of Maggie's double life came into focus, and it was jaw-dropping. 3 weeks after Maggie's arrest, Karen called me with news that made me nearly drop my coffee mug. "Daniel, you won't believe this," she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and glee. "The insurance company investigating Maggie's car damage claim just uncovered something massive. This isn't just about you. Narash's been running a scam for years." Maggie, it turned out, had filed an insurance claim with Horizon Insurance for the $3,200 in damages to her Ford Escape, claiming it was vandalism by an unknown perpetrator. What she didn't anticipate was Horizon's diligence. Their investigator, Detective Susan Harper, a woman who could sniff out fraud like a bloodhound, had been following Maggie's criminal case and recognized the connection. The Ring doorbell footage from Mr. Jenkins' house, which showed Maggie smashing her car, wasn't just evidence against her false police report. It was proof of insurance fraud. "We knew we had her on fraud the moment we saw the video," Harper told me in a follow-up call. "But when we dug into her history, we found a pattern that's frankly staggering. Over the past 5 years, Maggie had filed 17 insurance claims across 3 companies. Her car had been vandalized 4 times, her house burglarized twice with no signs of forced entry, and she'd claimed slip-and-fall injuries in 3 stores. She even reported a tree falling on her fence during a storm that, according to weather records, never happened. She was running a side hustle," Harper explained. "She'd target companies with quick claim processes, filed just below the threshold for major scrutiny, and always had enough paperwork to skate by." Maggie's obsession with framing me had been her fatal mistake. The Ring footage didn't just clear my name, it exposed her fraud to Horizon, who shared their findings with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Maggie's internet search history was a gold mine. Maximum claim without investigation, how insurance adjusters spot fraud, best companies for fast payouts. She'd studied the game like a pro, but her arrogance left a digital trail a mile wide. The FBI's investigation revealed something even more shocking. Maggie wasn't a lone wolf. She was part of a fraud ring, a network of 6 other people who shared tips on targeting insurers, crafting believable claims, and avoiding detection. Encrypted messages found on Maggie's phone showed her bragging to her partners about her plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, frame me to get me out of Willow Creek, and cash in on the insurance claim for her car. One message, sent 2 days before she wrecked her vehicle, read, "About to pull off the perfect plan. Get rid of the black guy next door and make $3,000 from insurance." I'm a genius. The audacity was breathtaking. Maggie had documented her felonies with the confidence of someone who thought she'd never get caught. But her partners weren't as loyal as she'd assumed. When the FBI closed in, 5 of the 6 flipped, agreeing to testify against her in exchange for lighter sentences. They revealed Maggie had been skimming profits, claiming insurers paid out less than they did and pocketing the difference. She was stealing from her crew, FBI agent Michael Liu told me during an interview. Her greed made her enemies on both sides of the law. Maggie's fraud ring had stolen over $2.3 million from insurers over 5 years, with Maggie personally pocketing $340,000. The FBI charged her with federal crimes carrying up to 20 years in prison, on top of her state charges for false reporting and perjury. Her quiet suburban life, white picket fence, blue door, and all was a front for a criminal enterprise run with the precision of a corporation. Back in Willow Creek, the neighborhood was reeling. The woman who'd positioned herself as the moral arbiter, calling the cops on kids and dog walkers, had been orchestrating felonies from her living room. The local news doubled down, with Channel 9 airing a follow-up story, Suburban Fraud Ring Exposed: How One Woman's Racism Fueled a Criminal Empire. The segment featured interviews with neighbors who'd been duped by Maggie's Concerned Citizen act, and it replayed the ring footage, now infamous in Maplewood. Maggie's personal life was collapsing as fast as her legal defense. Her sister, Diane, who'd reported her to the police, posted a scathing Facebook message that went viral locally. "I'm ashamed to be related to Margaret Thompson. Her racist, criminal actions are unforgivable, and our family condemns her." Maggie's adult children, living in California and Texas, stated that their lawyer, disowning her, and expressed sympathy for me. They were mortified by the national attention and wanted no association with her. My civil lawsuit against Maggie was gaining steam. Laura and Karen had built a case seeking $500,000, $50,000 for each day I spent in jail, plus damages for lost wages, legal fees, emotional distress, and punitive measures. Maggie's emails, where she'd calculated how much a false accusation could cost me, were now being used to justify our damage claims. She wrote that a lawsuit could bankrupt you, Karen said, flipping through documents. We're turning her playbook against her. The hospital where Maggie worked, St. Mary's, uncovered more dirt. Colleagues reported her making racist comments about patients and staff for months, creating a toxic environment. One incident involved Maggie refusing to process a black patient's insurance, saying, "People like that never pay." Another saw her call Hispanic patients probably illegals. The hospital, fearing lawsuits, made her firing public, and the story spread like wildfire. Maggie's house went into foreclosure, sold at auction for a fraction of its value due to its notoriety. The buyer, a real estate investor, marketed it as the fraud lady's house, turning it into a rental. Her retirement accounts were drained to cover restitution and legal fees, and a class action lawsuit from other fraud victims piled on more debt. Maggie, who tried to ruin me for money, was now penniless. As I watched her empire crumble, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, sure, but also a grim awe at how thoroughly Maggie had destroyed herself. Her hatred and greed had driven her to document her crimes in excruciating detail, handing prosecutors an airtight case. But the final blow was still coming, and it would come from a place she never expected. 6 months after my wrongful arrest, I, Daniel Carter, sat in a federal courtroom in Newark, New Jersey, watching Margaret Maggie Thompson face the consequences of her actions. The woman who'd once stood smugly by her vandalized Ford Escape, accusing me of a crime she'd committed, was unrecognizable. Her gray hair was dull, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow with the realization that her carefully laid plans had imploded. Maggie's sentencing hearing was the culmination of a saga that had gripped Willow Creek and beyond, and it was about to deliver a verdict that would echo for years. Judge Margaret Reynolds, a seasoned jurist with a reputation for fairness, presided over the hearing. She'd read every page of the case file, and her expression as she addressed Maggie was one of barely concealed disgust. "Ms. Thompson," she began, her voice steady but sharp. "In my 30 years on the bench, I've rarely encountered a case that blends such deliberate malice with such reckless stupidity. You didn't just commit crimes, you documented them, boasted about them, and left a trail that reads like a textbook for criminal behavior." The prosecution laid out Maggie's crimes in excruciating detail. Her insurance fraud ring had siphoned $2.3 million from companies over 5 years, with Maggie personally pocketing $340,000 to prop up her failing finances. Her false police report against me, backed by fabricated evidence and perjury, had cost me 3 weeks in jail and nearly ruined my life. She'd tampered with witnesses, offering bribes to neighbors like Mrs. Larson, and operated a fraud network with 6 accomplices, 5 of whom had turned on her. The most damning testimony came from one of her co-conspirators, Carla Rivera, who'd taken a plea deal. Carla's words silenced the courtroom. Maggie said framing a black man was easy because the system would believe her. She called it weaponizing white privilege for profit. She was proud of it. The gallery murmured, and I felt a chill. Maggie's scheme wasn't just about money, it was a calculated exploitation of racial bias, and she'd banked on it working. When Maggie stood to speak, her statement was a masterclass in delusion. "Your Honor, I was just protecting my neighborhood," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "I may have made mistakes, but my intentions were good." Judge Reynolds cut her off. "Ms. Thompson, you spent months planning to destroy an innocent man's life for financial gain. You committed fraud, filed false reports, and corrupted systems meant to protect the public. Your intentions were criminal from start to finish." The judge sentenced Maggie to 12 years in federal prison for insurance fraud, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. She was ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution to insurers and $150,000 in fines. Her state charges false reporting, perjury, and witness tampering carried an additional 5 years in state prison, to be served consecutively. At 58, Maggie was looking at nearly 2 decades behind bars, with no realistic hope of parole, given her lack of remorse. My civil lawsuit against her settled for $750,000, funded by the sale of her foreclosed home, drained retirement accounts, and future wage garnishments. The settlement included a clause barring Maggie from living within 50 miles of me for life. But the financial and legal victories paled next to the public reckoning. Maggie's case became a national story, featured on true crime podcasts, CNN segments, and a Netflix documentary, Fraud in the Suburbs. She was now a cautionary tale, her name synonymous with racist deceit. Maggie's life in Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury, Connecticut, was a far cry from her Willow Creek days. The prison's 1,200 inmates had heard about her case, and her reputation as a snitch who framed a black man made her a pariah. Within weeks, she'd been confronted by inmates like Tanya Brooks, who called her out in the cafeteria. "You're the one who lied on that brother, huh? You make us all look bad." Maggie's attempts to assert authority, complaining about prison routines or suggesting improvements, were met with scorn. Her cellmate, Maria Ortiz, reportedly told her, "You're not running anything here. You're just a liar who got caught." Her prison experience was a litany of humiliations. Her laundry job was plagued by accidents, torn uniforms, soaked bedding, missing items. Twice, she was moved to protective custody, once after bleach was found in her shampoo, and again after a threatening note appeared in her cell. Her health deteriorated. High blood pressure, insomnia, anxiety, and her complaints about medical care were dismissed as manipulative. The prison's mental health counselor noted her narcissistic traits and refusal to accept blame, ensuring parole would be a long shot. Maggie's family ties disintegrated. Her sister, Diane, tried briefly to reconnect but cut contact after Maggie insisted she was the victim. Her children, Emily and Mark, legally distanced themselves, with Mark changing his last name and Emily telling friends her mother was dead. Her house, sold at auction, became a rental marketed as the fraud lady's place. Her retirement savings were gone, and a class action lawsuit from other fraud victims added to her $800,000 debt. Maggie would die in debt, alone and infamous. Meanwhile, my life flourished. The lawsuit settlement paid off my student loans and funded a down payment on a house in a friendlier neighborhood. Apex Tech Solutions promoted me to lead developer with a team of 10 and a hefty raise. Laura and I got married in a small ceremony, partly funded by Maggie's restitution, and we're expecting our first child in 2025. I began speaking at conferences on criminal justice reform, using my story to highlight the dangers of racial bias in the system. The Netflix documentary won an Emmy, and I was invited to consult on its production. Willow Creek transformed without Maggie. Her house was bought by a young interracial couple, the Hendersons, who host block parties and wave when they see me. Mr. Jenkins, whose Ring camera saved me, now runs a legitimate neighborhood watch focused on safety, not suspicion. The toxic air Maggie created is gone, replaced by a sense of community I'd never thought possible. As I left the courtroom that day, watching Maggie led away in handcuffs, I didn't feel hatred or even satisfaction, just a profound appreciation for justice's precision. Maggie had tried to destroy me, but her hatred and greed built a case against herself so airtight that no bias could save her. She'd spent months researching how to frame me, only to document her downfall. Her 17-year sentence, her ruined reputation, Her shattered life fight was all her own doing. 2 years later, Maggie remains in Danbury, isolated and unwell, her parole hearing in 2032 a distant fantasy. Her letters to me, intercepted by my lawyer, are pathetic attempts at regret without accountability. She's a broken woman, haunted by the consequences of her choices. I, on the other hand, am thriving, married, promoted, soon to be a father, and using my experience to advocate for change. Maggie's story is now taught in law schools and diversity seminars, a warning of what happens when prejudice and crime collide. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't something you seek, it's living well and letting karma do the rest. Maggie Thompson taught me that hatred is a self-destructive force, and her perfect plan became her perfect ruin. As I look forward to my future, I smile, knowing she's in a cell, reflecting on how her attempt to destroy a black man destroyed everything she valued instead. Thank you for joining me on this wild journey through a tale of deception, justice, and redemption. Maggie's story sparks tough questions about vengeance, systemic bias, and the consequences of unchecked hatred. What do you think about the role of justice in cases like this? Should Maggie's punishment have been harsher, or does her self-inflicted ruin feel fair? How do we address the broader issues of racial injustice and abuse of power in our communities? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective, whether you agree with the outcome or have a different take. Let's keep the conversation going.